The bride was one sentence away from saying, "I do." That was how close it got. 300 guests sat in silk-covered chairs inside the Grand Celestial Ballroom in Seoul, dressed in their finest, watching the woman in white stand at the altar across from John Hyun-woo, 31 years old, head of the most powerful criminal organization in South Korea, and by every appearance, a man about to get married. The orchestra had already played. The vows had already started. The officiant was midway through the final lines, his voice steady and ceremonial, filling the room the way such voices do when everything is going exactly as planned. Then a phone was placed on the table beside the altar. It was Kang, one of Hyun-woo's most trusted men, who walked forward from his position against the wall and set the device down without a word. His face said everything his mouth didn't. Hyun-woo looked at the screen. The room didn't understand what was happening yet. A few guests near the front craned their necks. The bride, Shin Ji-yoon, saw Hyun-woo's face change and something behind her eyes went very still. What was on that phone was a chain of intercepted messages. Messages between Ji-yoon and Ryu Song-jin, the one man who had been working to destroy the John organization from the outside for 2 years. The messages were detailed. Meeting locations. Financial movements. Names. Dates. An entire architecture of betrayal, built quietly over months, using the trust that came with an engagement ring. The most recent message had been sent 3 hours before the wedding. Tonight. During the celebration. We move. The wedding itself had been the distraction. Hyun-woo read every word. The room watched his face. His expression didn't shatter, it didn't need to. It simply closed, the way a vault closes, quietly and with absolute finality. He looked up at Ji-yoon. She had already taken a step back. "Leave," he said. One word. Spoken at a volume that the entire front half of the room heard perfectly. She opened her mouth. Now. 2 men appeared from the side of the room. Ji-yoon was escorted out through a door near the altar, and it closed behind her, and the orchestra sat with their instruments in their laps, and the 300 guests, politicians, businessmen, dangerous men in expensive suits, people who had never once seen John Hyun-woo rattled, sat in complete silence and waited. Everyone expected fury. A display of power. Something cold and controlled and terrifying, because that was who he was. Instead, he turned and looked at the room. Not at anyone specific. Just, looked. Scanning slowly, from the front rows of powerful associates all the way to the back, where the less significant guests sat. The plus ones. The people who had come because someone else brought them. His eyes stopped. In the third row from the back, on the left side of the aisle, sat a woman no one had paid any attention to all evening. She was Ghanaian, with a small clutch in her lap and an expression that, unlike every other face in that room, was not panicked, not whispering, not performing shock. She was simply watching. Calm. Steady. Like someone who had seen chaos before and knew there was no use adding to it. Her name was Zola Adiz Mensah. She was 27. She had come with a colleague who had been invited. She was not supposed to matter tonight. Hyun-woo looked at her for 3 seconds. Then, in a voice the entire ballroom heard clearly, he said. "I'll marry her instead." The silence lasted exactly 2 heartbeats. Then 300 people lost their minds. Whispers became noise. Noise became chaos. Guests turned to each other with wide eyes and open mouths. Men near the front exchanged sharp looks. Someone laughed nervously and stopped when no one laughed with them. The people closest to Hyun-woo, his inner circle, the men who had stood beside him through the worst nights of the past 5 years, looked at each other with the specific expression of people trying to decide whether their boss had just made a brilliant move or completely lost his mind. Because this was not something anyone had prepared for. A betrayal, yes. They had contingency plans for betrayals. A cancelled wedding, yes, painful, public, damaging to appearances, but manageable. But this, pointing to a stranger in the back row and declaring a marriage in front of 300 witnesses, this had no contingency plan. This was not in any manual. Two of Hyun-woo's men walked to the back of the room. They stopped at the end of Zola's row, and the taller one said, quietly but clearly, "Mr. John is asking you to come forward." The woman beside Zola, her colleague, Dr. Park Soo-yeon, grabbed her arm. "Zola. You don't have to move. You don't even know this man." "I know," Zola said. She stood up anyway. She would not be able to fully explain this decision later, even to herself. Part of it was that she was not built to sit frozen while the room decided things around her. Part of it was something she had noticed about the man at the altar that she couldn't yet name. And part of it was the particular kind of curiosity that, in certain moments, is simply stronger than caution. She walked down the aisle. 600 eyes followed her. The whispers multiplied as she passed each row. Who is she? Does anyone know her? Why her? Is he serious? She heard all of it. She kept her pace even, her chin level, her expression giving nothing away, and she walked all the way to the front of the Grand Celestial Ballroom and stopped in front of John Hyun-woo. She looked at him directly. "I don't know you," she said. Her voice was quiet. "Just for him." "I know," he said. "Then I need you to understand I'm not agreeing to anything right now." His expression shifted, barely. Not quite a smile, but the suggestion of one. "Will you stand here while I address the room?" She considered him for a moment. "Yes." He turned to the 300 guests. "This wedding is cancelled," he said, his voice filling the ballroom cleanly and completely. "What happened tonight will not be discussed here. The woman standing beside me came here with no obligation and no agenda. Whatever she decides is entirely her choice." He paused. "I ask that the guests leave with the respect this evening deserves." Then he turned to Zola and said, quietly, "Can we talk privately?" Zola looked at the room, all those faces staring at her, this entire world that had nothing to do with her 48 hours ago, and then she looked back at him. "5 minutes," she said. "You have 5 minutes to explain yourself." The private room they were taken to was small and well-appointed, with a round table and 2 chairs and the muffled sound of the ballroom gradually emptying on the other side of the wall. 2 of Hyun-woo's men stood outside the door. Zola sat down. Hyun-woo remained standing for a moment, then sat across from her. "You're not Korean," he said. "Ghanaian," she said. "I'm in Seoul for work. I came with a colleague." "I know," he said. She studied him. "How much do you know?" "Enough to know you weren't a threat." He said it plainly, without drama. "When Kong showed me the messages, I had about 40 seconds to decide what to do. I looked at the room. I was looking for something specific." "What?" "Someone who wasn't reacting the way everyone else was reacting." Zola was quiet for a moment. "And I wasn't." "You were watching," he said. "Not performing shock. Not whispering to the person next to you. You were sitting there like someone who was filing away information." He paused. "I needed that. I needed someone who sees things clearly. Tonight changed a great deal of things very quickly, and I cannot afford to walk out of this building looking like a man who just collapsed." She looked at him carefully. "So this is about appearances?" "Partly," he said. "And partly something else." He hesitated, which surprised her. He did not seem like a man who hesitated often. "Earlier, during the wedding preparation. In the corridor near the east entrance. You said something to one of the venue staff." Zola frowned. Then she remembered. 2 hours before the ceremony, she had been walking back from the restroom and had passed 2 members of the catering staff having a quiet, tense conversation. She had noticed one of them slip a small device, something electronic, a transmitter of some kind, under a floral arrangement near the entrance. She had stopped a venue coordinator and mentioned it, casually, because it seemed like something worth mentioning. She hadn't thought about it again. "You noticed that," she said. "My security team noticed you noticing it," he said. "The device was a signal transmitter. We swept the building because of what you said." He looked at her steadily. "It was part of the same operation. Ji-yoon's people had planted it. Because of what you said to that coordinator, we found it and disabled it before the ceremony. The room was very quiet. You didn't know what it was, he said. You didn't know who it was connected to. You just noticed something that didn't fit and said something about it. He leaned forward slightly. Everyone else in that corridor walked right past it. Zola absorbed this. So I accidentally helped disrupt an operation I knew nothing about. Yes. And that's why you pointed at me. That, he said, and the fact that when I looked at you in that room, when everything was falling apart and 300 people were coming undone, you were the only person whose face made me think, that one is not afraid. She did not agree to a marriage that night. What she agreed to was a conversation. And then another conversation. And then, over the following 72 hours, during which it became very clear that the threat against Hyunwoo was ongoing and serious, and that the cancelled wedding had sent shockwaves through both his organization and his enemies, she agreed to something more complicated. The situation was this: Ryu Songjin's operation had been built around the assumption that Hyunwoo would be married to Jiun by now. The entire plan had depended on it, Jiun feeding information from the inside, the wedding creating a window of vulnerability, the celebration providing cover. When the wedding collapsed, the plan collapsed with it. But Ryu Songjin was not finished. He simply needed to recalibrate. What he did not expect, what no one expected, was for Hyunwoo to move faster. Within 48 hours of the collapsed wedding, with Zola's careful and somewhat reluctant participation, the paperwork for a legal marriage was filed. It was not a ceremony. There were no roses, no orchestra, no silk chairs. It was a document, signed in a small office, with Kang and Soo-yeon as witnesses. Soo-yeon, who had spent 24 hours trying to talk Zola out of it and then, when she realized Zola had made her decision, spent the next 24 hours making sure the legal terms protected her. Because Zola, whatever else she was not naive. She had sat with Hyunwoo for 3 hours on the second night and asked him every question she had, direct, specific, without softening any of them. What exactly was his organization? What did this marriage mean legally and practically? What was she walking into? What were the risks? What were the exits? He answered every question. Directly. Without spin. You could be in danger, he told her. I won't pretend otherwise. My enemies will look at you and try to find a way to use you. That's the reality of what I'm asking you to step into. And why would I do that, she asked. Because I will protect you, he said. Not as a transaction. Because you stepped into something that wasn't yours and you deserve to come out of it safely. That's not enough reason, she said. He nodded slowly. The other reason, he said, is that I think you're someone who does not run from problems. And this is, currently, a very large problem. She had looked at him for a long moment. If I do this, she said, I am not a prop. I am not decoration. If I am in this room, I am in this room fully, which means I will say what I think, I will question what doesn't make sense to me, and I will not be managed. I know, he said. You say that a lot, she said. Because I do know, he said. That's exactly why I chose you. The marriage changed the landscape in ways that Ryu Songjin had not accounted for. The plan had assumed a weakened Hyunwoo, humiliated by betrayal, destabilized by the collapse of a significant alliance, perhaps even temporarily irrational with anger. What emerged instead was something that made Ryu Songjin's advisors genuinely uncertain. Within a week of the wedding collapse, Hyunwoo had moved against 3 of the transmission points that Ryu's operation depended on. He had done so quietly, without announcement, using information that had been available to him for months but that he had been holding, waiting for the right moment. The wedding had been the expected moment, the moment everyone was watching the man getting married and not watching what his organization was doing. Hyunwoo had simply redirected that window. The enemy had expected chaos. Instead they found a man who had closed a security hole, neutralized an internal threat, and restructured his position, all within 72 hours. And he had done it with a woman no one knew standing beside him. That was the part that confused everyone. Inside the organization, the uncertainty was significant. Kang, who was loyal and experienced, had said privately to one of the senior men, I don't know what he's doing with the woman. The senior man had said, neither do I. But look at the results. And Kong had looked at the results and gone quiet. Because the results were undeniable. Part of what was confusing everyone was that Zola was not behaving like anyone expected. She was not staying in the background. She was not quietly occupying a room somewhere and waiting to be told what her role was. She was present, in meetings she had asked to attend, asking questions that no one had thought to ask, making observations that turned out to be accurate. In the third meeting she attended, a conversation between Hyun-woo and two of his senior financial managers about moving certain assets in response to the threat, she had listened for 20 minutes and then said, in the measured tone she used for everything, the problem with moving those accounts now is the timing. You're doing it while everyone is watching. Anyone monitoring those accounts will see the movement and understand immediately that you know what they know. You'd be better served waiting 72 hours and moving them as part of a scheduled reallocation that was already on the books. The room had gone quiet. Hyun-woo had looked at her. She had looked back, entirely unbothered by the silence. She's right, said one of the financial managers, after a long pause. They waited the 72 hours. The asset movement attracted no attention. Ryu Songjin's monitoring team saw a routine reallocation and reported nothing unusual. After that, the men in Hyun-woo's organization stopped looking at Zola with confusion and started looking at her with attention. There was an evening, about 2 weeks after the collapsed wedding, when Zola and Hyun-woo sat in the main room of his residence, a clean, quietly expensive apartment in a part of Seoul that felt like a different city from the ballroom where this had all started, and she said, I need to understand something. Ask, he said. The night at the wedding, she said. When you looked at the room and your eyes stopped on me. Were you really deciding in that moment? Or had you noticed me before? He was quiet for a moment, which was, she had learned, how he handled questions he was deciding whether to answer fully. Earlier that evening, he said. During the preparation. After my security team told me about what you'd said to the coordinator, I asked them to point you out. So you knew where I was sitting? Yes. She absorbed this. And when the moment came, you chose me deliberately. Not randomly. I told the room it was spontaneous, he said. It was more useful that way. An impulsive gesture reads as emotional. Emotional reads as human. I needed the room to see a human reaction, not a calculated one. But it was calculated. Most things I do are calculated, he said. That doesn't make them wrong. She looked at him steadily. What if I had refused to walk forward? I would have respected it, he said. And found another way. But you didn't think I would refuse. He looked at her with that particular expression she had started to recognize, the one that wasn't quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood. You were the only person in that room who didn't look afraid, he said. People who aren't afraid don't usually stay in their seats when something interesting is happening. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's a very specific read of a person you'd never spoken to. Yes, he said. I was right though. She picked up her glass. You were right, she admitted. And there was something in her voice that was not quite surrender but was, perhaps, the recognition that being read accurately by another person is its own strange form of being known. She called her mother in Accra 3 weeks after the wedding. This was a conversation she had been postponing. Her mother, a retired schoolteacher named Abina who had raised 3 daughters with a combination of warmth and unflinching practicality, had heard fragments of what had happened through Soo-yeon, and had been sending messages of escalating concern for 2 weeks. Zola, her mother said, when she answered. Tell me everything. So she told her everything. Not all of it, there were parts she was still processing, parts she couldn't fully explain even to herself, but the broad shape of it. The wedding. The betrayal. The moment at the altar. The conversations. The decision. Her mother listened without interrupting, which was not her natural state, and which meant she was listening very carefully. When Zola finished, there was a silence. Are you safe? Her mother asked. Yes, Zola said. Are you being treated with respect? Zola thought about this honestly. Yes. Another silence. Then, this man chose you in front of 300 people. He did. And you walked toward him. I did. Her mother made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. Zola, you have been walking toward difficult things since you were 9 years old. Do you remember when the schoolyard roof was on fire and every child ran away and you ran toward it to make sure the teacher got out? That was different. It was not different, her mother said. Be careful. Be smart. Don't let anyone make you small. And call me every week. Zola agreed. The situation with Ryu Songjin came to its resolution not through violence but through exposure, which was, as Zola had suggested in one of the late-night conversations, a cleaner and more permanent solution than the alternatives. She had said it like this: you could move against him directly. But that creates a new problem for every problem it solves. What actually ends this is making his operation visible to the people he's been hiding it from. Hyun-woo had looked at her. Specifically who? Specifically the government contacts he's been using, she said. The people who've been quietly enabling him because they thought he was a better option than you. If they see the full picture of what he's been doing, including using a woman to orchestrate a betrayal at a private ceremony, some of them will step back. Some, he said. Some is enough, she said. You don't need all of them. You need enough of them to make his position untenable. It took 3 more weeks. It was not simple, and it was not without its tense nights and its moments where the balance could have gone either way. But it moved the way Zola had described, and it ended the way she had predicted, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet recalibration of alliances, withdrawal of support, and Ryu Songjin finding himself isolated in a way he hadn't been prepared for. The threat did not vanish entirely. Threats rarely do, in that world. But it was contained. And the organization that had been expected to fracture after the wedding collapse was, if anything, more coherent than it had been before. People noticed. 6 weeks after the collapsed wedding, there was another major event, a formal dinner, annual, attended by the same tier of souls powerful and semi-powerful that had been at the wedding. It was the kind of event where appearances communicated everything, where who you walked in with and how you carried yourself told a story to everyone in the room. Hyun-woo attended. Zola attended with him. She wore a deep green dress that a stylist had recommended and that she had modified slightly to suit her own taste, more structured at the shoulder, the hemline adjusted. She was not trying to perform anything. She was simply present, the way she had learned to be present in rooms that were not naturally hers, with attention, with steadiness, without apology. The room watched her walk in. Not the way they had watched her walk down the aisle at the wedding, with confusion and whispered questions. This time the watching was different. This time they were watching because they had spent 6 weeks hearing about the woman that John Hyun-woo had chosen in the strangest moment of the strangest evening any of them had witnessed, and then seeing the weeks that followed, the containment of the Ryu Songjin situation, the stability that had returned to the organization, the quality of the decisions being made, and putting those two things together. A man near the bar leaned to the woman beside him. That's the one, he said quietly. The woman from the wedding. The random woman, she asked. He shook his head slowly. I don't think she was random, he said. I don't think anything about that night was random. At the other end of the room, a woman who had been at the wedding and had watched the whole thing from 3 rows back said to her companion, She's different from what I expected. What did you expect? Someone overwhelmed, the woman said. Someone out of place. She watched Zola across the room, the way she held a glass, the way she listened more than she spoke, the way she turned towards something being said to her with the full quality of her attention. She's not out of place at all. Hyun-woo, standing beside Zola, noticed the room noticing her. He said nothing about it. He didn't need to. At some point in the evening, during a quieter moment near one of the tall windows overlooking the city, Zola said to him, You know they're all trying to figure out the story. Let them, he said. They think they're watching a love story, she said. There was no judgment in her voice. Just observation. Maybe they're right, he said, in the careful, measured way he said things that were true but that he had not fully decided to commit to yet. She looked at him sideways. Don't be sentimental, she said. It doesn't suit you. It's not sentimental, he said. It's accurate. She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city lights. Then, what is it you actually want from this? From me, from this arrangement, from whatever we're building here. Honestly. He thought about it. Not the calculated kind of thinking, not the kind that was working out what answer would be most effective. The actual kind. I want someone in my corner, he said, who is in my corner because they chose to be. Not because they were paid. Not because they're afraid. Not because of what they want from me. He paused. I've had a lot of people around me over the years. I've never had that. She turned to look at him. Everyone else in that room wanted something from me, he said. You didn't. That's still true. She held his gaze for a moment. I want things, she said. I just don't want things from you. She paused. There's a difference. I know, he said. You always say that. I'm always right. She looked away to hide the expression that was trying to form on her face, and he looked at her and didn't bother hiding the expression on his. Across the room, someone who had been watching them turned to their companion and said, in a low voice, that random woman changed everything. They were not wrong. Later, walking to the car, Hyun-woo said it quietly, not as a performance, not for an audience, not because the moment demanded it, but simply because it was true and he had decided to say true things more often. Best decision I ever made, he said, happened on my worst day. Zola walked beside him. She did not say anything for a moment. Then, you should write that down. It sounds like something you'll need to remember when you're being difficult. He looked at her. She looked back. And that was how it was between them, not the story anyone in that ballroom had expected when the night fell apart, not the ending that the roses and the orchestra and the silk chairs had been set up to produce. Something different. Something that had started in chaos and confusion and 300 people watching a man point at a stranger and say words that made no sense, and had become, step by step, conversation by conversation, decision by decision, the most solid thing in a world built on instability. Not a fairy tale. Something better. Something real. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment below, where are you watching this from? And would you have walked down that aisle if a stranger pointed at you in front of everyone?